And now, a very special episode of Voluntary Visions podcast. Today is November 7th, 2012, and I am Daryl Becker, and I'm having a discussion with Alex Leach from kindcommunications.net. Did I get it right?
.org. But that's
.org. Damn. Cut from kindcommunications.org. This is... Someone better write my script better. Today is a discussion of NVC topics, including judgments versus evaluations and empathy fatigue. So I think we were talking for a little while, covering some of how we were going to proceed. Please, Alex, why don't you introduce the topics again?
Sure. So I think the place to start would be with this distinction of judgments and evaluations that happens. And it's sometimes a tricky distinction, but I'm gonna make my best stab at it. And judgments are really these mental states we get ourselves in, where we hold certain beliefs about how the world should be, or how the world needs to be, or sort of different beliefs about that. That things need to be a certain way, or that they are right if they are one way, they're wrong if they're another way. And this sort of determination of right and wrong, based on some sort of external standard, a measure of that. And judgments really get us into that world that really separate us from one another, that a judgment really means that one person is right and the other person is wrong. And so often in conflicts, once we get into that mental state that one person is right and one person is wrong, there's very little space for us to move forward in the conversation. There's very little ground left to collaborate, to come together, to see each other as fellow human beings, really. And that's tough. Evaluations are sort of these mental states we get ourselves in that, they're tricky. They're tricky because they can be both accurate, but at the same time they can be very alienating language. So let me give an example. I think that's the best way I can do this. I might, like if I'm in a room teaching nonviolent communication to a class, I might make an evaluation based upon the fact that all my students are smiling and they're looking happy. I might make an evaluation that things are going okay and that they're following the class and that things are going well, that they're learning the material and that they're keeping up. And while that evaluation may be really helpful for me, since it may allow me to proceed with the next set of material, I need to be really clear that evaluation is different than an objective photographic observation. In the sense that what I'm really photographically seeing is just smiling faces. And they might be smiling because they're following and they're enjoying the material, but they might be smiling just because they think it's polite to smile at strangers. Or they all realize that it's Friday afternoon and they all have great weekend plans. So the point is that evaluations, while less alienating than judgments might be, especially when we're communicating with other people, we do need to be aware of the fact that they are alienated from what is photographically happening, since there's still something that we are generating in our own heads. And I think that's the best way I can sort of separate these judgments evaluations, at least using broad brush strokes about what those two terms, how I think of them as one is about judgments being about how the world ought to be, and evaluations are about the different ways that we interpret the world as it is. But the key word under evaluations is interpretation still. There's still an element of interpretation there.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's a huge difference right there.
Yeah.
From my own perspective, what I was thinking was there certainly are hidden motivations going on in communication in general. And part of the thing is we're speaking of the jackal type of communication and the giraffe type of communication.
Yeah.
So when you're in that room with smiling faces, if that was the only piece of information that gives you a clue as to what are the hidden motivations going on, you could get fooled by that, I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah. I think the potential is there, to get fooled by that.
So how do you help people in learning the difference between judgments and evaluations? Do you mostly cover it the way we just did, or is there some other techniques that you have to show them?
Sure. I mean, I think a great place to start with any sort of exploration of judgments is anger. So if I can invite someone to consider a time when they're really angry with either another person, with an institution, another person, an institution, an organization. If I can invite someone to revisit a moment like that, where they're feeling a lot of anger, what's happening there is that the person is is having a situation where their needs are drastically unmet. And in their needs being drastically unmet, there's some sort of, I'm going to use a tricky word here, a negative or a less than positive, a less pleasurable feeling. Trying to strip away as much evaluation as I can since we're talking about the topic. These undesirable feelings, something like sadness, depression, fear, anxiety. So something like that is happening. And then while that's also happening, they tend to be making a mental judgment that things ought to be some other way. And sort of these two things come together to create what we commonly call anger. This sort of emotional feeling of anger. So I find that to be a really helpful way to get at a judgment and to get at these sort of should statements that we make in our heads, even when we don't necessarily formulate them in our heads as should statements. So let me maybe give an example of that. So I might be working with someone and they're really angry with their parents because their parents just don't leave them alone. They get phone calls constantly. They get a barrage of just their parents entering into their lives when they may not want them to. And so what may be going on there for that person, what I may find out is that they have a real need for autonomy and to be an autonomous, separate human being. And that's a great need to have. And we all have that need to be autonomous, self-reliant humans. And that need for that person is getting jeopardized when their parents are calling them or coming over unannounced frequently. Now, and then through an exploration of questioning and sort of allowing the other person, giving the other person really the empathy and the safe space to sort of explore that emotion a little bit deeper, that angry emotion that they get towards their parents. I may come to find out that really when they hear that knock at the door, what happens in a split second is that they feel their heart just sink and they're in a big pit and opening up in their stomach. That could probably closest be described as some sort of depression-y feeling, combined with a thought that, man, my parents should really respect me more, or they just don't respect me at all. And that sort of angry thought then takes over. And takes over the experience, since it's a lot easier to be in our heads than it is to be in our bodies. We find it so much safer to get up into our heads, and because there we're we're rational animals, and we can control all of these thoughts, and these thoughts create meaning and structure to our experience. Versus when we're in our bodies, we feel so much more vulnerable and out of control, because our bodies just do things seemingly on their own without us directing them to do them, such as breathing and heartbeats, but also these sort of emotional responses. That it can be quite scary for people to get back connected to what's happening in their bodies, and so they want to escape into their heads, and into that head realm is where we get these sort of ideas of should or angry thought. So we see in that example that this person has they have these dual things going on. They're feeling sad and depressed, but then they also have this angry thought that, man, my parents don't respect me enough, or put another way, my parents really should respect me more. Then I would say the last step of this process, to help people really get into connection with what a judgment is, or what judgmental thinking looks like, is to recognize that idea, man, my parents don't respect me enough, what the foundation of that thought is an idea that those parents should respect me more, or even parents in general should respect their children's autonomy. And while I may or may not agree with that judgment, the truth, what I'm trying to get at is whether that judgment is true or not, I think is separate from the discussion of what that judgment creates in one's head. That it creates a sort of relationship of the world is this way. I live in a world in which my parents don't show me respect. I think the world needs to look some other way, that it looks like parents show their children respect. And I'm now so fixated upon how the world should look, how I want the world to look, that I'm no longer connected to or participating in how the world actually works. I'm just sort of angry and stewing in my anger, and maybe I lash out in some unproductive ways that maybe I think will give me the response I want. Maybe I think will just allow that anger to escape my body. But ultimately, it just is set up on this foundation of not being connected to the way the world is, and rather focusing on and getting caught up in how I want the world to be, which can be unproductive at times, since the only place we can make change is in the present moment. That's the only place we can make any change. And the present moment only happens in the world that we're actually in. The present moment can't happen in a world that we want to exist. So, it again, is an encouragement to help people get back into that ever-present moment that we're in. Because that's the only space that we can capitalize upon and really utilize and make change in.
I really like the way you summed that up. I think you prepared for this one a hell of a lot more than I did. I'm slacking, but here's what I've been observing so far. I think it will help to add to what you laid out for the difference between judgments and evaluations.
Okay.
What I was seeing is that there are the hidden shoulds that happen in the case of both judgments and evaluations. These are these thought bubbles that are attached to their associated feelings and towards this jumble of constantly irritating facts of certain unmet values and desires. The instance of the child is going to value autonomy, and they're going to desire autonomy, and they're going to do that in a big way. So when I first learned about parenting, I started reading The Continuum Concept by Gene Liedloft. It was a book that helped me as a young parent. I believe I was 23. So this is back in the day. And what it helped me see the difference in attitude between people in various indigenous cultures, such as the Yamamoto in Brazil and several other cultures that this woman traveled around to visit, and then in Britain and America and other westernized countries. I think Holland was another one. And the difference in childcare was enormous in terms of respect of autonomy. I didn't have the language for it at the time, but that was the difference. And it produced children who were a lot more at peace, and they had a lot less of these shoulds running through their head, or the friction. Because here's what I was noting. You were describing the aspect of this contradiction that happens within the mind of the world as it actually is. Their observations are proving it. And the world as they really want it to be. It's a strong desire. And in that friction, there is the anger. Because if it wasn't there as anger, there would be despair and a lack of a will to live. The will to live is there to produce the friction so that you get up and do something.
Right. I think that's such a good point, and it's a good point that I sometimes miss, or that sometimes I don't fully explore. Is the really life affirming nature of anger at a certain level. That it is something that's there, that's really motivating us. It's one of sometimes I use a metaphor that our feelings are an alarm system built into our bodies that alerts us to our needs are unmet. And if that's true, then anger is like the biggest alarm. It's like the big fire alarm. Everyone needs to leave the building. Like, everyone needs to get up and move right now because there are some drastic needs unmet. And so it can be a real great motivating force within ourselves to get up, engage in the world that is, in order to hopefully create or make change towards the world that we want there to be. And so, there's nothing there. Yeah, I want to really affirm that too with you, that's something built in there.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking the exact same thing, and you certainly beat me to it. The feelings, as Marshall Rosenberg has said, as I think I would corroborate too, and you do, behind every feeling there's a beautiful need. And I know he's meaning to say that you value and desire stuff, and you're going to try to get it. And to use bigger words, there are motivating factors, and you're going to not have motivating factors as soon as you die.
Right.
But until then, you're going to have motivating factors.
They will be ever present. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So what? But at the same time, as all of that's happening, I do want to emphasize upon what a judgment does in terms of how we communicate once we're making judgments. So, like, when and this is whether I make a judgment out loud or not. So whether I openly make a judgment to someone I'm talking to, I think that shuts down communication. So if I'm talking to someone and I make a judgment that, good people, real righteous people will give money to the poor. If I make that judgment to someone I'm talking to, maybe I'm talking to someone who I just noticed passed someone on the street without giving them their change in their hand. If I make that outward judgment, that I vocalize that judgment out loud, my listener's probably not interested in listening anymore. Communication quickly breaks down. And it's very hard to actually have an honest and empathetic conversation about what needs may or may not be fulfilled by helping the poor that are all around us. But I also want to emphasize that I think something similar does happen even if I don't vocalize the judgment. So even if I see my friend and I think to myself, well, he really needs to be giving more to charity. I kind of know how much money he's making, and I think he could spare a few extra of those bucks. And even if I never say that out loud to him in a conversation, already I'm priming my own pump. I'm priming myself to already be sort of alienated or set against this other person, that they are an other I'm me, and now we're set apart from each other, and I have to now convince this person somehow to come and join me, convince this other to be more like me. And that can be really, really alienating. It really shuts down communication. It flavors everything that comes out of my mouth, and it can be really, I think, alienating. But the word I'm looking for is can really cause communication to break down, and disconnection to happen. So it's tricky. It's a tricky thing, right? Where this emotion of anger, which is so fueled by our judgments, can be really great at moving us out of despair and into action. But at the same time, we have to be really cognizant of these sort of mental judgments and what do we do with them, and how do we sort of allow them to happen, but then at the same time see through them to the real needs that they're expressing. Right, because even those judgments are are expressions of needs. They're just sort of warped into language that we've learned from a very young age, and so it's tricky business. It's like walking a tightrope sometimes.
I agree. Yeah, these concepts are important to grasp. I've been thinking about the allegory of the martial arts that I learned. I learned some Baji Chuan and Baji Qigong, and that means 8-direction fist, or 8-direction energy work. That's what Qigong means. Kung Fu just means hard work. So,
and what are the metaphors that you see in those?
What I see in the metaphor is that the difference, the way I was taught Kung Fu, Baji Chuan, Xingyi Chuan, and the difference I was taught Shotokan karate when I was young. There was a lot of yelling and tension and muscle strength being used in karate. I believe that some of that was an error of teaching, but whatever it was prevalent, and I think that the yelling part was just part of the pattern, as was the kata and everything that we learned, the forms that we learned. That's what kata means. So when I got to Kung Fu, what I learned was, now we have to get stronger, more flexible, more durable, more graceful. No yelling. And after every strike, everything has to relax. And you have to be ready all the time. And yes, we're going to do impact with each other. And yes, guess what? Impact is going to hurt. But as we do this, you're going to get more durable. And we'll do it properly, and we'll take our time and learn, And we back off when we get injured and heal first. And in this case, it just was teaching all of these lessons about how, such as getting hit with judgment after judgment. I know we're going to get to this next subject soon, but it's that instance of, in every single type of conflict like that, where all of a sudden you're wired up and you're in combat. It's a different ball game. All the forms go out the window. Yeah. The rule is to end up breathing. Unfortunately, in real combat, and in NVC that breaks down, real conflict is two losers, the big loser, the bigger loser. Or both people impaled on each other's sword, Right. I don't know who won,
Right. So true. But what I liked in what you just talked about a lot was sort of the idea that you go into impact, or you go into motion, and then you return to rest. And I see a great parallel there. That sort of it should be clear that nonviolent communication never wants to stifle one's thoughts. It's not. I mean, the whole project is to get out of judgments in terms of thinking there are right or wrong ways to be in the world. Right? NVC is very interested in viewing the world as much as possible without that lens of right and wrong, that sort of judgment that this ought to be like this, things ought to be like that. The lens is rather what serves needs. So, the point I'm making is that these judgments are going to come up. They're just going to come up. we live in a world where they're so pervasive and they've so invaded our own heads that they're going to happen. And so the goal then is not to make judgments stop happening inside one's own head, but rather just when they do come up, to notice what the need is and to feel that energy to try to actualize that need, and then to return to rest.
And that's what I was getting at with my metaphor. I was trying to explain essentially the need for when you are a beginning student, especially if you've come from previous training, and in a way, we came from previous jackal training that taught us how to judge ourselves and everyone else, and how to make sure that you could always cause that friction inside of making your observations of the world and then your desire of how you want it and trying to, like that, pushing them together. And for those who can't see the video, because we're not that high tech yet, I was pushing my clenched fingers together. So the beginner student tries very hard to strike really hard, to move really fast, to keep up. And every strike is with all this tension. And the face is even all tense. And you're not attacking with your face. So
Right.
The lesson is you have a lot of time to just basically find out that as you do that, you lose strength and power. And the retraining is done where we learn to soften ourselves and everything becomes easy and mellow. And then so that the time when you use your power, it's all there, right there. Arms and legs and hips and shoulders together in motion, which is a lot more than just your arm. And yelling is, and that's about as loud as it gets.
I loved that. That was very beautiful how you put that metaphor together, and I think it works really well. And especially the point you made at the end there, which you were making the point, but just to build it out a little bit more, is it's about the conservation of energy. That just like, where do you want your energy to be consumed? You can have your energy sort of consumed up into a sort of fascination or a fixation on how you want the world to be. Or you can invest your energy in actually making the world you're in into that world. Right? So you can invest your energy in scrunching up your face, the yelling, the sort of building up the tension in your body, or you can invest the energy in the actual contact. Which is where you want the energy, right? You want the energy in the place where you're actually making the change and making a connection with this other person to affect change in the world. And you don't, so often where we rather put energy is in that judgment of how I want the world to be or how I think the world ought to be, but we find that just exhausts us, right? I think about days that I go through really angry. I tend to be exhausted by the end of those days, and exhausted so much quicker than the days where I might notice how what needs are drastically getting unmet in me, how I really wish the situation could be different, and then invested time and energy in collaborating with others to make it so. Just radically different outcomes and radically different energy levels at the end of both of those experiences. And I think so. I thought that was spot on what you were pointing out in that metaphor. I thought it was really great.
I think that leads us into the second topic in a way, doesn't it?
I think so. Yeah, so there's this moment that happens, I think, this moment happens for all of us, and it happens, depending on the day, multiple times a day to maybe at least once a day. But this moment may come up where we feel our energy is just exhausted, and there's a lot of emphasis in the nonviolent communication world and NVC teaching about empathy. Empathize with other people, empathize with yourself. That there's this real crucial tool of empathy that can unlock so many more doors. But given that we all were trained previously under some other methods of communicating and some other ways of being in the world, it takes a lot of energy, especially at the onset, to engage empathy when it may not feel like our default option. It's not our default to go to empathy. Our default is rather to do something else. So it requires maybe a lot of energy to remind ourselves that we want to use this empathy tool. And when our energy is running low, we may just feel exhausted, and we just can't use empathy right then in that moment. And you know, I want to emphasize first that that's such a human experience and such a normal. And what do I mean by normal? My evaluative term there. What I mean by normal there is an experience shared by so much of the human experience, by so many other humans, to get to that place that I'm just too tired to use empathy. At the same time, it's also a tragic situation. It's tragic in the sense that it would probably be really helpful if I was able to use empathy right now, and it would be really nice if I could use empathy, but I just can't. And that's tragic, but it's not. But tragic may not mean that it's wrong or it's you are bad or it is a bad thing that you can't get that energy there. It's just sad. It's just a little downtrodden that, well, it's a bummer I can't empathize right now, but I can. And so the encouragement is always to be connected to oneself, because when we get disconnected from ourselves, that's when it's so hard to communicate. So to stay connected with ourselves, with our own body, and to know where our energy is and what we're actually capable of and what we're not capable of.
That hits it exactly what I am constantly encountering when I hit empathy fatigue.
Yeah.
What you just remarked on right there, what you were underlining this thing essentially where at the point of empathy fatigue where I don't have even a cobweb of empathy to run across and understand and see where they're at,
right.
Even the cobweb's broken, it also means that simultaneously there's cobwebs inside of myself where I'm not connected to that. And it's that same type of tension where in not performing the form correctly because there was too much tension and there was nervousness because of the stern expression on the instructor's face as he's observing you and how well you're doing. And in the process of that inscrutable face with its facial hair, it becomes tension that's based on my own patterns that I've been through with a father who has a nice beard as well. And
sure.
So, these patterns go through, and I guess it sees like that. When there's disconnect between knowing and understanding the other person's feelings and what's motivating them, that usually means that there's an internal disconnect too. And that's something that I think you just revealed to me, is if I can't find the connection there, I probably have lost some connection in my own caring about myself.
Yeah.
And then that's partially why I'm fatigued, is because I'm not even caring for myself well. And I need empathy first aid.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Oh, empathy first aid. If only we could all carry around packs of that. Oh my gosh, the world would be so much easier. There's actually there's a diagram, there's a picture in my room. It's too far away. I worry about walking away from the microphone to give the actual who made this picture. It's a great picture, though. It's called the MVC Tree of Life, and I saw it at the Bay MVC Center in San Francisco. And what it is it's this tree, and the point of it is that there are 3 points where we can get connection. When we're feeling disconnection, there's 3 different avenues to find connection. One is empathizing with other people, so to get connected to what's going on for them. Another is to to have self-empathy, so to connect with what's going on for me and empathize with yourself. But as we're just talking about, what happens when we just have complete empathy exhaustion, where I can't empathize with them or me? Well, then there's the third option for those folks and those moments where it's just self-expression. So can you just get to a place where I can, even if I can't empathize with myself, even if I can't empathize with you, can I somehow just express what's going on for me and hopefully express it with enough contours, enough nuance that it doesn't trigger the other person, but can express it myself, and maybe that'll dislodge something or move something to get back into connection. So it's a nice picture over there. I wish we could look at it maybe next later episode when we're recording things, but. It's a really good diagram that I think speaks to exactly what you were talking about those moments where I feel a disconnect from people out there. I feel a disconnection with myself in here. And so maybe what empathy exhaustion is telling us in that moment is that we really need to move into expressing ourselves, that we haven't been so far in the conversation, so far at the end of the day, we haven't been doing enough of expressing my own feelings and needs, where instead I've just sort of been bottling them up and sort of shoving them down. Or maybe I've been empathizing with them, but I've been keeping them inside. So I've been empathizing with them, but I haven't necessarily let others in on that internal world. And maybe not too, but it's one model that it just popped into my head as something to speak to towards the example that you were given.
Thank you. That really helps, because we didn't want to leave people listening to empathy fatigue and just scratching their head saying, well, what can I do for that? And,
Right.
I guess I could have another beer. Yes. That is a possibility. But to deal with empathy fatigue, I would suggest instead what Alex was just suggesting. I wanted to give another example of that third option which you mentioned, which was communicating, expression.
Yeah, communicating, expressing, yeah.
Yeah. Something I found some benefit of a couple years ago when I lived near the river. I would go to the river frequently, and there was a time where I was just very deeply feeling a lot of things about some events in my past. And I had realized that I had all this time that I went down to the river after school and such, and I spent some of it actually at that point starting to talk to myself, as if I was talking to myself back in time. I found it actually therapeutic and useful. I was just be able to express something to myself, and I think it connected that empathy to myself in that kind of way, and I felt better afterwards because there was the freedom of expression, one of those values that we have, to be able to communicate.
Right.
And so that was useful, and of course, because it was to me, there was no other people who could misinterpret or misjudge my words. I mean, who better knows my intention as I speak to myself than myself?
Yourself. I think that's a beautiful story. And I think it's a great skill that we all need in our lives. This ability to just express, even if the expressing happens to a babbling brook or a teddy bear. Right? I mean, there's something I think magical that does happen when we just have the permission, we feel that permission to freely express ourselves without necessarily having to edit so much or try to control or contain. I definitely recommend what might be more need-serving when talking to another person might be, depending on who that other person is, it might be more need-serving to do some self-editing, but at the same time, I think we need that sort of freedom of expression and that sort of freedom to just sort of let it out from the internal. So let the internal become the external. And I think that can help us get reconnected to ourselves and to the world, and it makes that empathy fatigue easier. It helps it to pass, and helps us to get rejuvenated, maybe even.
Brilliant. I think we covered empathy fatigue from some angles. I think it comes down to that type of sudden internal disconnect where we can, for whatever reason, for the things that are internally going on, we've lost connection, and not just to the other person, but also to something in ourselves too. I think that that's part of what I'm seeing, because I have been making some discussions with people about NVC, and they're very focused upon the origin of NVC. For example, on the certain statements or proclivities of Marshall Rosenberg, and maybe of the way certain people teach a formulaic way of speaking NVC, which, we can often say sounds kind of clunky and can cause a strange reaction upon first hearing it. So those are some evaluations that I would make. I would say these individuals and these certain ways of teaching and learning this, that's one thing. But the real thing that I see as a value is that these are tactics, tools, and it's not easy to tell from my voice or the things that I speak of, but I actually view the world as a military situation from all intents and purposes, meaning that there are control mechanisms in play, and some of them I'm fine with because I chose to live in Hawaii for a reason, and some of them I would prefer to have them different, and I'll see what I can do to arrange that.
Sure.
So these things, they require a tactical approach. Most of the actual conflict I deal with has nothing to do with an actual military force as would be colloquially understood. But it's more of a damaged individuals who obviously have some motivating factor, and they may pose a danger to me. And that requires a response that is adequate to meet said danger. And for me, I found that this is a tool of instantly finding what someone is feeling, something that I've worked on for some years, and using that to figure out what is motivating them. And that's all it is. And if I have that as my goal, then how much I empathize and really care for them as a person can be pretty minimal. But how much I'm observing, I'm able to take in and quickly figure out and parse to see what is motivating their feelings. I can then figure out what is going to likely happen. And since I don't live in an action movie, I'm usually okay,
Yeah. Sure. Right. Right. And I think that was really, I think that's really crucial to point out, that there is sort of a difference between noticing what someone's feeling and needing and empathy, even. Because I might notice that someone's feeling and needing a certain thing. But empathy goes a little bit further. Empathy is sort of this action we take where we decide to really view the world as the other person views the world. Really get into the other person's experience. And by deciding to do that, we are deciding to sort of extend a certain amount of loving kindness or a certain amount of caring to this other person and who they are and where they are in the world. And I think that's so emphasized within NVC because that really facilitates open, honest, and empathetic communication. But at the same time, as I said earlier in this talk, NVC is really trying to, at one level, getting us out of thinking in terms of right and wrong and thinking more in terms of what serves needs. So noticing what needs we have and finding what best serves the most amount of needs in both myself and other people. And that may not always be the strategy of extending empathy to others. Sometimes my needs for safety my needs for personal autonomy, sometimes even the needs of the other person, needs for autonomy maybe, but also maybe needs for space, needs for time alone. That empathy may really not be the best tool to serve those jobs. Empathy may not give you safety, depending on who you're engaged with. Empathy tends to not allow another person to have time by themselves or to be alone. And so it should. What I really encourage people to remember is that what this whole project is centered around is figuring out what human needs we have, we being myself and the other people I'm interacting with, and finding strategies that meet all of the needs, rather than some strategy that I think is the morally superior or the right strategy, and any need that it doesn't serve, well, that just is a casualty on the battlefield. We want to get out of that, so it's a really good point you make about that there is this difference between noticing someone's feelings and needs and really empathizing with who they are and what they're experiencing in this moment. And so you can do one without the other, and neither and both are not required or demanded from the school of communication. It's not like you have to do these things all the time, 24/7, and if you don't do them, you're failing. We're always trying to help people realize that that's not the game we want to play in anymore. Because that game so often creates win-lose, when what we want is win-win.
Just like in learning any skill, it really helps to take the pressure off, to be allowed to be a beginner, a neophyte, if you want to use that word, and just begin to understand the concepts. I'm looking at my NVC backup sheet. It's a handy little thing I keep around with me, going over the concrete actions that we or they are observing that are affecting our or their well-being. And then how we or they feel in relation to what is being observed. And then the needs, values, and desires that are creating these feelings, and the concrete actions that we or they can request in order to enrich our lives. And that part is right there, understanding that the values are good. It's a good thing that we have these values. That's what makes us alive. And there has to be a way of seeing a pathway to abundance so that we can have plenty enough of everyone's values and desires fully satisfied. So what I was going on about the military situation is that I encountered damaged individuals. I was taught certain holistic medical skills. They helped me understand and see things. I mostly turn that like a radio dial. I turn it all the way down until when I'm required to turn it up because I'm working. And if I was in a dangerous situation, though, I might turn it up to know things. Sure. And in doing that, I found out when I first learned the skill, as many people in my business learn it, they go a little crazy with it, and they have it turned all the way up, and they're like finding out that, oh my God, everyone's really damaged. And it's like, yes, everyone's really damaged, including yourself.
Yeah.
So welcome to the world,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Someone put another way is that the open secret is that we all carry around with us shame for being humans. And we all think it's a secret, but it's really something we all carry around.
I think it's especially not just shame for being humans, which is kind of I would rather put it that there is shame that was created as these little should judgment bubbles that were created a long time ago as little patterns. If you didn't have those formed somehow, you really don't have that damage. And you are something to contend with. I mean, you are certainly a force to be reckoned with if you have none of those. Because everyone that I ever measure or encounter or deal with on most any level, they have a lot of these. And therefore, because they're not very cognizant of them, it doesn't take long before they have a stimulus, an emotion, and a pre-programmed response based upon these frictions that we just outlined in the first part of our discussion. So what I was getting at is that this makes them incredibly easy to manipulate. And I'm not saying like I like to manipulate people. I'm saying the ruling class that we were speaking of off the recording, well, they are pretty good at this kind of stuff. They really, really know how to manipulate people. And that just makes people the number one danger that we generally encounter. But they're also, of course, an asset because, you know, a huge portion of people that we encounter are very benevolent and would probably pick us up if they found us collapsed. You know, most people I encounter, they're really nice like that. So that was what I was observing in terms of that. I wanted to underline that.
I think that's a great, excellent point. I think the point you make that it's so easy to manipulate us when we're not cognizant of this modeling that we're all shaped by. And when we're not aware of the avenues readily available to us to get out of that modeling, right? So I can notice that I'm getting triggered to sort of a fight or a flight reaction by a certain stimuli. That is, a certain stimuli or a certain event is triggering my fear or it's triggering my anger, and that tends to lead to a certain pattern modeled outcome. I mean, talk about Pavlov's dogs, right? You ring the bell and everyone starts salivating. So it's very, very true how easily it is to manipulate us when we're not aware of our own power, our own ability to transform a situation, our own ability to transform, that is to say, see through what's happening in us to the deeper feelings and needs. And then to see that from those I can make a request that will enrich my life and enrich the other person's life. And it's a big shift, and part of that shift has to do, I think, with people's willingness to be vulnerable. There's a certain amount of vulnerability there, and I don't know if I want to say that vulnerability is natural, but rather I think what I want to say is that we've grown up in these worlds where most of us have experienced rejection at some time in our lives, either from all sorts of people. I'm drawing a big blank on anyone I've ever encountered who hasn't experienced rejection in their life. So since most of us have grown up with this sort of rejection feeling and how just horrible that feels when you get rejected by another, creates and starts to pattern this sort of fear of rejection, this sort of fear of, well, if I reveal my real needs and feelings, my deepest desires, my deepest motivations, and really my really vulnerable feelings, that I'm really scared right now or I'm really, really sad, that I at least am scared sometimes of revealing those things because I'm in fear of rejection. I'm in fear of someone seeing me for who I really am, really, really seeing me, the core of me, and then rejecting it and turning away from it. To me, that's probably the most tragic situation I can find myself in. And so I get patterned into really trying to avoid that. But the strategy I learned to avoid that is to not express my feelings and needs, which doesn't actually solve the problem. That doesn't actually move anything forward. It just continues to get myself locked up inside of myself, locked into my own prison. And so there is this sort of I don't don't know if I want the word that's coming to me is leap of faith, but we might argue or talk about a better word for that. But there almost needs to be a leap of faith that this other person is someone who's benevolent. I mean, not complete leap of faith. I don't mean, every time we meet someone on the street or any time we encounter another person to immediately assume that they have our best interests at heart. But using enough context clues and having enough trust for a large enough grouping of the human population that we can sort of step over that fear or move past it in such a way that I'm able to open up be vulnerable about what my feelings and needs are in a way that hopefully is life enriching for both myself and the other person.
I agree, and I think that... Oh, I'm sorry, you got more to add?
No, not really. More of me just going around in circles, I think.
These are important things because the people who are new to NVC, who are learning these skills, who are beginning to try to see the world through these intellectual lenses, they are going to encounter this type of fear in the same way as when I was first training in Kung Fu. You encounter the fear because you're going to impact someone. They're going to impact you. And occasionally you can get knocked down. And, it's a good thing to just be ready for all of that. And that requires courage. So there's a long period of time as you're beginning to learn this skill in a good setting where for the first couple years you don't get knocked down and you're just learning the skill, but you can get pushed around a little bit because that's what impact does. And you build up to it with courage because just to step out on the mat is vulnerable. And in the way we're stepping out into the world, if we're going to be cognizant of what we're feeling and we're going to be okay with that, and we're going to be aware of what is motivating those feelings, if we communicate about either of those two things, that is vulnerable because that's tipping your hand to someone. That gives them, in some ways, an advantage, but it is disarming in some ways, too, because then it's kind of like saying, hey, look, here's the gun. Oh, would you like it?
Yeah, right.
What do you think? It's a leap of faith. There's a vulnerability in that,
Right. In so many ways is such a powerful action that it does both make myself vulnerable, but also disarms the other person. And so it's such a power when we're able to have that courage to step out like that and to tip our hand. It's a very, very powerful moment, I think.
Oh, and by the way, in no way did I just endorse that that anyone should just tip their hand to just anyone. Right. There's a time and a place. Right. It's in the same way as it's inappropriate to talk about someone else's feelings if they're not comfortable being vulnerable and having that being exposed suddenly. I think that's one of the most off-putting things that some novices to NVC do is they might jump right to making a guess about someone's feelings, but that person might not even be interested in having said feelings be broadcasted. That's newsflash. That's hidden proprietary information. What I did find though is that usually they are unaware of the motivating factors of those feelings, the ones that the person wants to refer to. Usually, they're not explicitly aware of what is the motivating factor, say, a desire for communication, connection, autonomy, those major ones, the volition, so that you're getting things accomplished, and according to your own autonomy and your own plans. Those are major things, and when you have that quick list of the major needs, as it were, I think those, and I'm using that jargon word needs, those connection needs, physical well-being, honesty, play, peace, and autonomy, one way or another, I do find that something in there, in every single person, it's coming from one of those. And just like you don't have to love a person to be able to take them down in combat, you also don't have to love the person to just fully know what it is that they're feeling.
That's motivating them.
What is motivating them is, you can figure this out without completely giving in to like the warm and fuzzy feelings that you have of connection with whoever that is.
Right.
that just might not be, and might never be.
Might not. Right. I think that's great to notice, and I think it's important to notice because it doesn't mean that. What it points out is that it doesn't. If you're not able to have those warm, fuzzy empathy feelings, that doesn't mean that communication isn't going to go anywhere. It doesn't mean that communication is inherently going to fail from that point forward. Luckily, we can still move forward and we can still have a conversation with this person and we can still probably get our own point across and find a solution that meets both of our desires, our deepest desires. And so it's really important to notice that about NVC, that it sometimes gets cast in this light that it's a communication model based all around warm, fuzzy love. But while that is sort of there, and it's definitely at a certain core element there, it's also not necessary in a certain sense, that we can move forward without it in those moments when we just can't tap into it. It doesn't mean we have to stop, or that we need to just give up entirely. I think what's healthy to remember is that the warm, fuzzy, loving, empathy feeling is there and so emphasized so much because it's a very powerful tool, and it gets us a lot of things. It gets us to a point. It makes communication easier. Tends to make communication easier. It helps other people who are very emotionally charged and triggered to sort of de-escalate and feel safe about de-escalating and feel safe enough to sort of share and get more vulnerable. And it just it makes it easier on ourselves when we treat ourselves with that sort of loving, tender empathy pointed towards ourselves, from ourselves, makes our whole internal world a little softer and nicer, which then makes our external communication softer and nicer. But all of that being said, and all of that is with the purpose of praising that sort of tool, it is really important to note, as we're noting in this conversation right now, that it's not a required tool, that it's not something you have to use, and that if you just can't reach for it, that's okay. And we can still use some of the other toolbox in the NVC toolbox to help us find win-win solutions and to help us connect with this other person. And here I'm using the word connection to mean sort of a broad, sort of any sort of communication with this other person that isn't alienated and isn't jackal driven.
Not to be jackal about it, but I wanted to correct one of the last metaphors I just used. I didn't think it conveyed what I wanted it to. I said that you don't have to love someone to be able to take them down. It was not what I was aiming for. What I was trying to say was more like to say that in actual combat of some sort, especially ones where it's, I should say, just training, and it's not combat, where it's just actual, there's an understanding, and it's going to stop at a certain point, likely. There is an object to remain somewhat rooted, and the person who loses their root ends up down, and that's the way it goes. And when you don't have certain types of things connected, these values, say the value for serenity, that's a very powerful root when you do have serenity and you are okay with how things are, just the way they are. And you have that ability to observe what's going on and accept it. That's very solid right there. And it's very difficult to uproot someone emotionally who is so deeply rooted like that. In the same way, you could easily uproot yourself if you don't have that serenity for how things are. So in using these tools, there is that first step in the whole thing of the empathy fatigue, where we have to have some connection to our own self. And I think one of those things is that part where we're solid with how things are right now, based on what we're observing. It might not be the most optimal situation, but one way or another, it's like we are caring for the little self inside of us, saying, it's okay, like here's like a little Daryl on like a front pack here. We're almost done. The shopping trip didn't go as planned, but we're gonna be home soon,
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, so that was me with my little mini-me Daryl on my front pack. I wish you guys could see it.
That is, yeah, I think that's spot on. I think that says a lot, yeah.
So we might have covered those two subjects pretty well, huh?
I think so. I think it was a good overview and a good, not even just overview, but a good diving into both of those topics and really exploring some of the space under the surface.
Well, I wanted to thank you so much for the discussion. Till the next time, I'm going to end the awesome recordedness of this and wish you guys all aloha. And thank you so much.